hello. You know, just saying that one word is one of the most complex and extraordinary operations we know. 70 muscles and 500 million brain cells go into it. And what's more, pretty much anyone who can speak English over the age of 2 can do it without even having to think. The story of language is surely one of the greatest stories we have. In this series, I'm going to explore language in all its amazing complexity, variety, and ingenuity.
Our species perhaps could live together without language, but then it wouldn't be what we call the human species.
I'm going to try to understand how we learn it, how we write it.
Oh my goodness, this is magical.
How we sometimes lose it.
Oh my Lord!
How it defines us to the very core of our being. Why it can make us laugh and cry and tear our hair out or inspire us. It's what I treasure above all else. It is what makes me, me. In this program, I'm going to take you on a journey to find out why we are the only species to have developed this miraculous gift of language. We'll see the individual miracle of how we acquire language at an early age. And celebrate language as one of the most marvelous tools humanity has, a continual process of innovation and creation.
That really hurts, actually.
To begin my exploration of language, I've come here to Northeast Africa, close to where our species first evolved.
There are around 7,000 languages in use on our planet today, some spoken by a mere handful of people, others by more than 1 billion. It's a surprisingly short time, only about 50,000 years since mankind graduated from Uggs and grunts and growls into linguistic flowering.
These are the Turkana, a pastoral nomad tribe who are about as far away from me and my tribe as you could find. But one thing that I do share with them is language. Turkana is as sophisticated and complicated a tongue as ancient Greek. And although I can't understand a word, it actually works much the same as English does. There are nouns to name things, adjectives to describe them, and verbs to explain what you can do with them. Every language provides an amazingly rich and adaptable set of tools that mankind shares the world over, and which every Turkana child imbibes with their mother's milk.
And how old is a baby when they start to speak? Two years, is it?
Yeah, 2 years. When she talking for Akiporo, Akamu means winter, summer, winter, summer.
I see, winter,
Because,
summer.
yeah, that's
Two winters, 2 summers.
Yeah. Because
Those are the
that's
first
the
words.
first language.
Father, mother. Yeah, it's the same everywhere.
What's really amazing is that these children, even the smallest of them, within a very short space of time, are able to grasp the full complexities and all the phonetics and all the manners and all the remarkable depths that the Turkana language is capable of. It's no more effort for them to acquire a full language than it is for them to grow hair. It just happens. And yet it's the most complex piece of brain processing that we know of on the planet. It's a kind of miracle.
Miracle. You are a miracle.
All over the world, from the cradle of man in East Africa to a hutong in China, this same miraculous process takes place over the course of just a few years. This is Ruby, who lives in London.
Ruby.
Ruby is 15 months old, and over the next year, we'll be tracking her development from ums and ahs to recognizable speech.
Say ta.
But how do we learn language? And what exactly is the difference between language and communication? After all, the natural world is an absolute cacophony of communication. Birds singing to greet the dawn, meerkats whistling to each other to warn off predators, elephants trumpeting to attract a mate, dolphins clicking to point out food. The closer you get to us humans on the evolutionary tree, the more sophisticated that communication seems to become. Monkeys have a whole grammar of whoops, howls, and calls that signal everything from fear to joy to love. But it's still a long way from this to language as our species knows it. It's not that we haven't looked for an amazing talking ape. There's one. It's just that so far we haven't found one.
It's so closely related and yet so completely different. And I think it is language that's the thing that's most different about us. If I trained hard, I probably could bounce from tree to tree, but you could train all your life and you could never say, Betty had a bit of bitter butter and put it in her batter and made her batter bitter. Then Betty took a bit of better butter and put it in her bitter batter and made her bitter batter better. Or if you could, you'd be the wonder of the age.
So how did we manage to develop language when other primates have not? I've come to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Biology in Leipzig, where they study a number of large primates. I'm here to meet one of the world's foremost evolutionary linguists, Michael Tomasello.
There's a general assumption that we all have that language is one of the things that separates human beings from all other animals, but that maybe animals like the great apes, our closest relatives with whom we share so much DNA famously, are sort of on a continuum on the way to language, that maybe they can be taught language. Does your research show that any of this is likely?
Well, in evolution, everything's on a continuum, but they're a pretty far step away on that continuum, I would say. So their vocalizations are pretty hardwired. And before you can get to something like language, you obviously have to be able to produce sounds when you want to and not when you don't.
So if a food is coming, they make this noise, or if a predator's coming, they make that noise?
They're very much tied to their emotions. So the vocalizations go with emotional states. So if they're frightened, they scream. If they're excited about food, they hoot. If they're greeting someone after a long time, and they give a kind of a submissive pant grunt. And so their vocalizations are fairly stereotypical and with only a little bit of flexibility.
Well, no one can doubt that animals communicate. I mean, you can see our closest cousins here, primates like us, they're communicating like Billio in all kinds of ways. But I don't think we can call that language. And one of the problems they face, even sophisticated primates, is that they simply don't have the mechanical apparatus that's necessary for speech. They don't have the control over breathing. They don't have the complex facial muscles that allow such extraordinary sounds that we can make, and I'm making now, though goodness knows they can try and compensate. Nor do they have the larynx or vocal cords in the right position for speech, but they can make signs. So maybe sign language is possible amongst primates. That's worth thinking about, surely. Hey? You can't just fart, surely. There must be... That's better. What is your best guess, based on your research, as to how human beings separated, why and when they acquired this
this difference, this ability to project their personality onto their fellows, to cooperate, to use language as a social cooperative medium in a way quite different from others?
I think the initial step was that we ended up having to collaborate in order to produce food. So something in the ecology changed that meant that we had to put our heads together to be able to acquire food. And working together toward a common goal means that we have to be cooperative in sharing the food at the end. We have to coordinate our movements when we do that, and it puts pressure on for communication, because I think the first major function of uniquely human communication was to coordinate collaborative activities.
For simpler types of hunting, gestures and grunts may suffice, but the pursuit of more elusive quarry demanded a more complex system of communication. When the ancestors of these Wauja of the Xingu River in Brazil first decided to hunt some alligators, the whole village needed to work together to catch their prey. So, somewhere along the line, cries and grunts turned into words and sentences. Clearer communication brought other benefits. The increased efficiency created more free time to spend together as a community. As language blossomed, experiences could be shared and stories told.
So language gave us the power to hunt ever more efficiently and with greater cooperation, but it also granted us completely unseen new benefits. We were able to talk about the past and to project our lives into the future. This transmission of knowledge across the generations is what gave us, ultimately, civilization itself.
Language became the foundation of human society and culture. And for me, thinking about it, using it, playing with it, has always been one of the greatest passions of my life. If our changing environment first forced us to learn language, what did that language then do to us? Did it change us physiologically? Elsewhere in Leipzig's Max Planck Institute, leading geneticist Dr. Wolfgang Ennard is unraveling the mysteries of the human genome. His work is providing some tantalizing clues as to how our brains became hardwired for language.
Wolfgang, one of the most important things that science can discover is where speech comes from, where this extraordinary ability of human beings to have evolved and to process language, the thing that marks us out perhaps more than anything else from other animals, where it comes from.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of theories, but a recent addition to those theories has been this mysterious two-letter gene difference that has been discovered, that you and your colleagues have discovered. Can you tell me about it? It's called FOXP2, is that right?
FOXP2, yes. Yes, that's how gene names are. They're kind of strange letters and numbers. I mean, FOXP2 is currently the biggest foot we have in this door, right? To kind of what the genetics makeup is, how we evolved language and how language, or speech at least, functions.
The FOXP2 gene is what's called a forkhead box protein found on human chromosome 7. All mammals have it, and in fact there are only 2 amino acids difference between ours and the chimps, and just 3 between us and mice. Its connection to language was realized when it was discovered that humans with a mutation in the gene can have extreme speech disorders.
We need to somehow study that, right? And the clue to that, or the only possibility we really have to study that, is to look in mice, right? Because we can make mice that have the human version of the FOXP2 gene, and then see how they compare to kind of their normal mouse littermates.
These are pups that have the gene in?
Yes, yes. So they carry the human version of FOXP2.
Right.
Mice can have litters every few months, so the study effectively follows an evolutionary process on fast forward. By closely monitoring these little creatures' squeals and squeaks, Ennard is already spotting some small but significant changes.
They have some subtle features, especially in their brain, but also in their vocalization.
Oh, really?
Where there's slight differences, and we hope that these slight differences gives us some clue to where and what actually changed during human FOXP2 evolution.
And you would hope, of course, to discover not just new sound waves or new frequencies at which they're communicating, but maybe even an effect in the communication, which is to say maybe quicker mating or passing of news of food, or I mean, who knows, or is that being far too optimistic about the possibilities?
I think that would be asking too much.
Yeah.
The mouse would not start talking.
No, they're not going from squeaking to speaking.
I mean, they're still mouse, right?
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. But do you think FOXP2 has more secrets to give up for you? Is there still, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we understand so little in terms of what it really does, because after all, the brain is a pretty complex organ.
Yes.
And how certain molecular changes relate to physiological changes in the brain, to behavioral changes. This is just a hard problem to find out.
Of course, scientifically appealing and revealing as it might be, to experiment with FOXP2 on primates would be ethically unthinkable. But that hasn't stopped us imagining what communicating with our closest cousins might be like.
Human. Chimp. Mouse. And human. If only it were that simple. But we are, it seems, beginning to unlock some of the mystery. A few misplaced atoms on chromosome 7 was probably part of it, causing some improved communication during hunting, which led to a better diet, so that those who had the gene had more children. But exactly when and where humankind first started to speak, we'll never know. But we certainly did learn to speak, and frankly, ever since then, we've never shut up. As haven't you, I notice. Yes. But absolutely none of that would have been possible without this exquisite thing, this glorious 3 pounds of mushy grey matter, which differentiates us from all other animals, the human brain. With this cauliflower walnut-like mass containing something like 100 billion neurons, we are able to think our thoughts, dream our dreams, dredge the memory banks, to translate them into words, and then get our bodies actually to speak them. But the strange thing is, we know more about the origins and workings of the universe than we do about the human brain. It's mankind's final frontier. So what do we actually know about this language-producing machine between our ears? I'm off to have a delve into my own brain.
At the University College London Centre for Neuroimaging, psychologists, brain boxes and neurolinguists have the very latest kit to look into the grey matter.
Oh, this looks like a little office.
Yeah, the control room.
It's through there, right? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, I've seen these on House and things like that.
Dr. Joe Devlin and Professor Kathy Price are clinical psycholinguists whose work is focused on how language works in the brain, specializing in how strokes affect language ability.
Okay.
Here goes.
They're going to have my brain scanned by MRI, the magnetic resonance imaging technique that allows scientists to see which parts of the brain are working, lighting up areas which are being stimulated, in this case, while I'm speaking.
Magnetic resonance imaging. It's what I'm undergoing even as I speak, an extraordinary technology which allows one to view areas of the brain and the activity which they undergo when performing certain tasks, such as this rather self-reflexive one of describing MRI.
Professor Price has now analysed my scan results.
This is your brain here. And this is a model of the brain where we've superimposed a summary of the activations during different conditions. It doesn't matter where the human being has brought up or how they have learned to communicate. The same set of regions are involved. And it's like looking at bodies. You know, they're all made up of the same components. Anyone who learns to play the piano will be taught to do it, the same way, use the same set of instruments.
When it comes to understanding exactly how our brains work in the language process, we are still in the neurological equivalent of the Dark Ages. But looking at the images, I can't help but wonder at how much of my brain is involved in it. Is my grey matter saturated with language?
You know, language uses most of our brain because it is integrating all of our sensory sources, all the different types of memory that we can have, and then coordinating how we respond to it. And then everything we do is then monitored by language. So language then becomes an integral part of our human nature.
I do feel that language is what I am, so what happened to the writer Robert McCrum is just the sort of thing I would fear most. 15 years ago, a stroke left Robert unable to walk or talk. Language lived on inside him, but he could not express it.
I had what's called a right-side hemorrhagic infarct.
Goodness me.
Which was quite a bad one. And I was paralysed from all the way all down my left side, so that right goes to left in the brain.
Yes.
And so I was paralysed and couldn't stand or do anything. I was completely poleaxed. The stroke took place in what's called the basal ganglia. It's very deep in the brain. But I did have language. I never lost. I couldn't speak because my mouth was all.
Oh, so the language was in your head?
The language was in the head, but the face was sort of frozen or half frozen. But there was a nervous 2 or 3 months when I wasn't sure what I was going to get back.
Right.
As Robert recuperated, his brain did an extraordinary thing. New parts of it took over to replace the burnt-out ones. It rewired itself. And although it's not quite as easy as before, Robert is now able once again physically to verbalize his thoughts. It's now believed that somewhere between 50 and 80% of the brain is involved in language processes.
And then gradually it's got better. And even now, when I'm speaking to you, I still have to sort of make an effort.
So there's a greater amount of conscious production.
Absolutely.
So it's like someone who has to walk by remembering how to use.
I have to remember. I have to remember to articulate clearly and not to speak too quickly. And I have a slight. I mean, you probably don't get this, but I see this, but there's probably a slight stammer, particularly if I'm nervous. Small, tiny things.
So language is clearly integral to being human. It's hardwired into us at a genetic level, utilizing every part of the brain. Indeed, the brain will rewire itself just to keep us speaking. But how intrinsic, how automatic is language? Is it like eating and sleeping, or is it to some extent a learned skill? It's really a kind of nature versus nurture question, the kind of question that has beguiled and fascinated scientists and philosophers since time began. And it's not often that nature affords us an opportunity to investigate.
In the midst of the craziness of the French Revolution, a young boy was discovered in the forests of the southeastern Massif Central, one of the wildest and least inhabited regions in Europe. It appeared that the boy had been living alone and like an animal for some years. Feral children have fascinated philosophers for centuries, offering a window into human nature untainted by society's strictures, and in doing so, revealing how language might be formed. Finding a real-life feral child was nothing short of sensational. He was captured and ended up in Paris under the care of the innovative doctor Jean-Marc Itard, who was working at the recently established Institute for Deaf Mutes. The boy, whom they named Victor, having experienced almost nothing of society and no education, was considered something of a blank slate.
Victor?
Tu veux un peu de lait? Du lait?
Most significantly, he was unable to speak, suggesting that language is not just genetic, it needs to be learnt from others.
Doucement, 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 pas si vite, pas si vite. Dernier mot.
For the next 5 years, Itard devoted himself to Victor. He taught him how to eat, how to use the toilet, how to restrain his animal urges, in particular with the female inmates once he had reached puberty, and of course, how to speak French.
Victor, Victor, va chercher la plume. Va chercher la plume.
Victor's vocal cords, like any muscle unused to exercise, needed training. And just as a baby learns to babble, so Victor started to learn to articulate sounds.
Marteau, marteau, marteau. Très bien. Tu peux prendre le pomme de terre. Doucement, doucement, pas si vite. Un peu plus fort, comme ça, direct. Assez encore.
Despite remaining in Itard's care until his death, aged 42, Victor never learned to talk. The reasons why were never established. Perhaps it was a congenital defect or psychological trauma, or perhaps Victor simply started to learn too late.
Oui, très bien, très bien.
The trouble is, cases like Victor make for messy scientific study because, by definition, with all feral children, their backgrounds are unclear. What seems certain is that there is a window for language acquisition which closes round about early puberty, say, and after that it's much more difficult to acquire language. Of course we do, as we often learn foreign languages, but as most of us can testify, it becomes a lot more difficult as the brain loses plasticity. One thing, though, is certain. By the age of 5, most of us will have acquired the gift of language.
To study this magical process, Dr. Dev Roy of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology had cameras installed throughout his house. For 3 years, Dr. Roy filmed his son as he began to talk.
Okay, water, water.
Dr. Roy's son was right on schedule. At first, he spoke in simple phonemes, the wahs and gahs. By 18 months, he had progressed to words and phrases. After 24 months, like most other children, he was acquiring 10 new words a day. And how is Ruby, the little girl we met earlier in the film? How is she doing?
Who's that? Say
Who said that noise?
It's a sort of mixture of melody.
Which sounds so cute.
I have a horrible feeling my first word might actually even have been sorry. Baby's chair. Baby chair. That's exactly right. There's the baby's chair, and both the babies are on the chair now. Today is actually her second birthday, yes, so quite literally she's 2. Yeah. And she's not your first child, so you've had the opportunity to observe children learning, acquiring, as I believe the technical phrase is, language before.
Yes. Yeah.
And I suppose you're probably more relaxed by the time it's the third one.
Well, yes, and also it's more funny because you kind of make it more of a laugh rather than. Yes. I think with your first, you're slightly watching what everyone else's kids are doing to see when their language is coming. Is mine advanced? Is mine behind? Whereas with this one, it doesn't matter because you know it'll come whenever she's ready.
And she's got her siblings to help her.
Yeah. Well, yes, and to be quite annoying because they're always trying to get her to say all the bad stuff.
Of course they are.
And ragging her up, which is great, but it does mean she's not necessarily learning all the words that you want her to learn.
My apple, thank you. Apple, exactly.
From here on in, Ruby's vocabulary grows day by day.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Hello. Hello.
I. An. A. Banana. What is your name?
Mary.
No, what is your name?
Lily.
Yes, well done. What is your name?
Lily.
It's wonderful watching Ruby starting to speak. I want to know more about how children manage this miraculous process, so I've come to see a bit of a hero of mine, the renowned academic and author, Professor Steven Pinker. I wondered if you could explain to me what current thinking might be about language acquisition. Presumably it needs society, it needs encouraging.
Language at a bare minimum needs words, and moreover, the words have to be the same words that everyone else is using. If you had your own private language, even if it were possible for language to just spring out of the brain, it would be completely useless. No one would understand a word you're saying. So the child has to be attuned to the words that are floating around in the linguistic environment. But there also has to be some kind of talent in the child's brain that allows them not just to parrot back the exact words and sentences they've heard. It would be very, very upsetting if that's what your child did. We expect children, right from the beginning, to compose their own sentences, to abstract the rules of combination, the rules of grammar, so that they can talk about new events and new thoughts and take the familiar words but rearrange them in new sequences from their own.
What's really amazing is that with this gift of grammar, we can go beyond forming our own simple sentences and begin to be creative with language.
So even a young child can actually come up with a sentence that's never before been uttered in the history of their language.
Right from the beginning, from the time at which children first start putting two words together, some of those combinations are clearly from their own creativity. An example, a child who had, whose hands were covered with jam and wanted the mother to wash them. The mother washed off the jam. The child said, "All gone sticky." Now that's doesn't correspond to any adult English sentence, but the child had those two words and had the formula that put them in that order to express the idea of passing of a state.
We can't brush right now because you're getting.
A path-breaking way of investigating how children instinctively use grammar was created in 1958 by a pioneering psycholinguist who I've come to meet today, Jean Berko Gleason.
Hello.
Twyla.
Twyla, one of my favourite names.
Twyla is a
How old are you, Twyla?
4.5.
4.5.
Twyla is 4.5.
Good age.
Okay, Twyla. Hi.
Hi.
I'm going to show you some pictures, okay?
It's called the WUG test, and Jean still uses the original cards she designed half a century ago.
This is a WUG.
They showed that even with nonsense words they've never heard before, children can use grammatical rules that they've somehow absorbed.
What are they? You tell me.
Wug.
Say that louder.
Wugs.
Wugs is great.
Very
Very good.
Wugs.
Okay. This is a man who knows how to bing. He's binging. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday he?
Bing.
Binged. Very nice.
Yeah.
Here is a man who knows how to zib. So what is he doing? He is?
Zib. Zibbing.
Zibbing. Very good. What would you call a man whose job is to zib? He has to do it every day. His job is to zib. So he's a?
Zibber.
Very, very, very good.
Is there any evidence as to how many times a child who's right in the flush of language acquisition needs to hear someone not correct them exactly? They say, "I thinked that." "Oh, you thought it, did you?"
But the amount of speech that parents provide for their kids at home before they get to school is crucial, absolutely crucial. All the research has shown that hearing a lot of language and getting the opportunity to talk in different ways really is the kind of insurance you would want for your kids to be successful in the world.
Actively trying to coach them or correct them is irrelevant in your estimation?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think coaching and correcting, but reading the books and talking to them and listening to what they say, and giving them the opportunity to engage in different kinds of linguistic experiences.
Yeah.
In other words, having them tell you what they did, narrative, but having them describe something. A lot of different, say, genres that kids might be able to engage in. That is a wonderful thing for young kids.
Wherever people congregate, they talk. They use language to affirm, to reaffirm, to confirm, to reassure, to amuse, to beguile, to delight, because language itself seems to fascinate and delight us. So much so that perhaps over 400, it's reckoned, conlangs, constructed languages, have been made up, usually out of idealism, like Esperanto, I suppose, is the most famous. Sometimes languages are made up for more amusing reasons.
Marge,
One of the newest languages on the planet is Klingon, named after the eponymous Star Trek species. My guest appearance in the Klingon version of Shakespeare's Hamlet is not one of my proudest theatrical moments.
That really hurts, actually.
Berol!
Backstage, before the performance, I chatted to a level 4 Klingon speaker, the highest you can be. Darmond Spears is a computational linguist who took the rather unusual step of teaching his son Klingon as his first language.
We had a lot of fun. We would play language games. So I would say things to him like "Nuktak och kev pobudja," and he would point to my cheek. Where's my cheek? And I would say "Nuktak och richleja," and he would point to his nose.
Wow.
And then one day we're playing on the carpet in the living room, and I had his bottle that he would drink from. And we didn't have a word for bottle, we didn't have a word for diaper, we didn't have a word for, a high chair.
Yeah,
most
domestic
of these things.
Exactly.
Exactly.
They're not very domestic people, the Klingons.
I had words for shuttlecraft and phaser and transporter ionization unit. I didn't have bottle, right? So we were using the word for bottle that is like a drinking vessel, like Rivjet. And I said to him one day, we'd had this game, Nuktak och, this or that. And so I said to him, Nuktak och Rivjet lejet. So I used the word for bottle, I used it with a suffix, I used it in a sentence. I didn't point at it, I didn't look at it, I didn't do anything like that. And this 2-year-old kid, baby, infant, toddler, started crawling over towards the bottle and grabbed the bottle. And at that moment, I knew that this was working. He was learning this language, and it was very exciting.
Gertrude! What the heck,
One of the other things we did was we had a lullaby that we would sing every night, the Klingon Imperial Anthem. Tach Jaj Wo, may the Empire endure. And we sang it as a lullaby.
I'm so picturing this little baby in a sort of Pooh Bear onesie singing the Klingon Empire
Absolutely right.
song.
So there were things like that, and he was learning to count, and he was learning colors, and he was learning words. But as he went from about 2.5 to 3 years old, he stopped. He stopped being interested. He stopped enjoying doing it with me as much. So I would say something to him in Klingon, and he would say it back in English, and I would try to encourage him. And he started to resist it. And it was fun and it was interesting. And when it stopped being fun and interesting, I stopped doing it.
Klingon was little use to Darmond's son in communicating with the outside world, and that is the key factor in whether a language survives and flourishes or dies. One of the most enduringly practical forms of communication is sign language for the deaf.
Surprise, shock.
Since the first form of it was codified in Paris back in 1760, over 200 different versions have evolved. But can we really call this a language?
Hello, my name is Claudia, and I'm from Germany. Hello, I'm Ian, and I'm from New Hampshire. Hello, I'm Janice, and I'm from Oklahoma. And we're the Little Theater of the Deaf.
So, Janice, perhaps you can ask Ian and Claudia to explain to me, in all my ignorance, why sign language is more than just gestures and why it's a complete language.
Sign language really is part of language because we can't hear, but we can communicate. It's a visual language. Instead of hearing it and depending on our ears, we sign it and we depend on our eyes. We don't just make up signs. There are actual words that have pictures and meaning and structure, sentence structure and concepts. Everything is involved so that it's clear and understandable communication.
And Claudia, you're German. In Germany, is there a Deutsche Zeichersprache? Go on, say that. Deutsche Zeichersprache.
She doesn't interpret German.
And I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. But so, is there a Germanic sign language? It's different from French or Italian, let alone American.
Yes, it's very different. Just as the writing is different in every language.
So an Italian signer would not be able to understand a German signer?
Nope.
No. It's very, very interesting.
One afternoon, there was a large wolf that waited in a dark forest. For a little girl to come along. Finally, a little girl did come along, and she was carrying a basket of food. Are you...
How do you agree on a sign? Does it spread very quickly that this is going to be the sign for Barack Obama, for example?
Really, it starts with a big name, like Obama. Typically, there's an agreement, and it just sort of develops with big deaf politicians. No? Population.
So what is Barack Obama, for example? Right, and can you give me the derivation of that? Where would that have come from? Is it B-O, or is it, it's not the letters B and O, is it?
It's O.
O.
Something about the flag.
Ah,
O,
right.
Emphasize the O, and then like the flag, the American flag.
I see.
Obama.
And I'll ask Claudia this, not meaning to be offensive, but it's just interesting because as a German, there may be a different sign for Adolf Hitler from one that we might use in the rest of the world, for example. It's one of the most famous images. I guess if you were British, you'd just do the moustache.
What's the American sign?
Yeah,
Hitler.
the moustache, exactly. That's what I thought. And in German?
Normally it's the same, but I have some people sign like a combination of Heil Hitler.
And the salute hidden into the, yes, very interesting. Okay, Madonna.
I don't want to sign that one.
Oh, so now that's interesting. Is that like pointy breasts? There, you see? Exactly. Now that's what's so wonderful about sign language is you can do things that really incorporate the character and the reputation of the person, not just the dull spelling of their name. It could be witty.
I agree with that. And deaf tend to put more of the spirit in the language.
Yeah.
So that they get a reaction when they laugh. Oh, okay. It has a good effect.
When she opened the door, the little girl saw that there was someone in bed with a nightcap and a nightgown on. But she had approached no nearer than 25 feet when she realized it was not her grandmother, but the wolf. For even in a nightcap, a wolf doesn't look any more like your grandmother than the MGM lion looks like Calvin Coolidge. So she reached into her basket, pulled out an automatic, and shot the wolf dead. Moral? It's not so easy to fool little girls nowadays as it used to be.
The question of how thought and language came about in the human race is one of central concern. So it's hardly surprising we've spent thousands of years thinking and speaking about it. The biblical account suggests that Adam and Eve spoke a prelapsarian language, a single language of paradise. And then came the Tower of Babel, and thousands of languages were unleashed upon the planet, and we were all doomed to crawl on its surface for eternity, misunderstanding each other. Not surprisingly, people became rather obsessed with the idea of what that primary language of Adam and Eve's was, even if it was only a metaphor. What did mankind first speak? The Old Testament Babel myth doesn't quite do it for me, but 250 years ago, one of the greatest of linguistic forensic discoveries was unearthed here by two brothers. Well, this is the famous Leipzig Christmas market, and it all looks rather a fairy tale, doesn't it? That's quite appropriate, because aside from being remembered for J.S. Bach, Leipzig is also remembered for the Brothers Grimm, progenitors of some of the best-loved fairy tales Europe ever produced. But also, and perhaps you may not know this, the Brothers Grimm were responsible for founding the science of linguistics, what the Germans call philology, the tracing back to the very roots, the languages of the world. Professor Wolfgang Klein is a philologist and psycholinguist who is currently working on Grimm's original documents. I suppose Jakob his greatest contribution is something called Grimm's Law, or Rask Grimm's Law.
That's true. Both terms exist, actually. Yeah. I mean, what people noticed, actually began to notice systematically, so let me say the second half of the 18th century, is that there are many, many similarities and correspondences between languages. So, and they even discovered that there are similar words, say, in language as remote as Sanskrit on the one hand, and Greek, and then the Germanic language.
Sanskrit is an ancient Indian language.
That's true.
Yeah?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely true. So there's a huge distance, and still words sometimes sound surprisingly similar. And there seems to be, it's not just accidental. Sometimes these similarities are completely accidental, but clearly not in that case.
Grimm's Law, as it became known, showed how the consonants of different Indo-European languages relate to each other. For example, there's a regular relationship between words beginning with P in Sanskrit, Latin or Greek, and F in Germanic languages, including English. So pater in Latin becomes father in English. This single language, Proto-Indo-European, or Pi, the root to over 2,000, is thought to have been spoken more than 5,000 years ago in the steppes of southern Russia. As tribes migrated through Europe and Asia, Pi split into a number of dialects, and these in time developed into separate languages. Pi isn't the first language that humanity spoke, but it's the first of which we have evidence.
This English that we speak, that you're very kindly speaking as fluently as anybody can, frankly, it seems so natural to us, and it seems so separate. It seems so different from German and from French, certainly different from Danish.
It is.
From, you know, any of these languages, and Persian languages, and yet with this common ancestor, it's quite extraordinary. Do you think, in some sense, it's necessary for mankind for us to have so many languages?
Well,
why Babel? Why did it happen?
First of all, it's beautiful, and I wonder actually whether this argument biology is not also a kind of romantic argument. I really would like to see the evidence that this is necessary, but it's beautiful to have many species. Beautiful not to have just one type of cat, but many types of cats. Yeah. And so in that sense, of course, that argument also applies to languages. It's beautiful to see all of this. Yeah, the Romans said, varietas delectat, so to have many things is beautiful, yeah.
What would you regard as the thing about language that keeps you getting up every morning and being excited about your job?
I mean, everything what makes human beings human is based on language. I mean, our species perhaps could live together without language, but then it wouldn't be what we call the human species. Yeah. Whatever we know, whatever we have done over the centuries, just based on language, on languages and language.
Some would argue that the 6,000 plus languages we speak on the planet are structurally just one primal human tongue. What's amazing is how quickly language evolves according to how quickly children can develop slang or how quickly culture and technology demand. There's a constant practicality about the way we use language, as well as a deep beauty. One thing's for certain, language will never stay still.
And finally, aged 2 and 3 months, Ruby is chatting away in complete sentences with her siblings.
Has Stanley got it?
She understands much more than she says, and over the next year, her vocabulary will explode. Some children, perhaps Ruby will be one of them, do not stop at learning one language. And there are plenty of others to choose from. There are currently 194 member states belonging to the United Nations, with over 6,000 languages spoken in them.
Gaddafi now is saying these demonstrators are followers of bin Laden, and I ask him, is the 6-month-old baby who was killed a follower of bin Laden also?
Maybe many of our species' troubles could be avoided if we understood each other better. Would having one world language, be it Esperanto, English, or, to be utterly neutral and possibly perverse, Klingon, even be an advantage? Perhaps in world forums like here in the UN Security Council, which is currently in session discussing the Libyan crisis, it would. But then it would also put Zaha Bustami out of a job.
And how many working languages are there?
2, English and French.
Oh, so that's it? Just English and
for
French?
the working languages.
I see. And then there are official languages?
6 of them.
Only 6?
Yes. The official languages are English, French, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, and Arabic, which is the most recent addition to the official languages.
There are no other speakers inscribed on my list. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.
Zaha, it's rather wonderful watching you translate simultaneously. It seems to us like an extraordinary thing. It's like a conductor being able to read a music score. It's incredible the human brain can do this. I look down here and it's almost like a living symbol of the Tower of Babel, of the fact that mankind split into so many languages. Yes. Do you sometimes think, gosh, the world would be better if everybody spoke Esperanto?
No, there's a beauty to languages. Each and every language has its own beauty, its own music, its own imagery, its way of expressing the sentiments and the nature of the people who speak that language. It would be a loss if that language did not exist. Oh, I'm very much in favor of the Tower of Babel.
This building where the General Assembly of the United Nations meet perhaps symbolizes more than any other what happened to humankind after Babel. Thousands of voices upraised in different, mutually incomprehensible tongues, trying to comprehend each other, trying to understand, trying to build some sort of peace out of the wreckage of the 20th century. Well, they sort of solved their problem by reducing all those languages to the 6 working languages of the UN. And that way, people do understand each other. They understand
how they think, perhaps. They understand how they communicate, and a little of the history of each language. But languages do so much more than that. Languages, in many respects, define our identities, who we are. And that's what I'll be looking at next time.
4 times 14. We have any division?
From Kenya to Israel, Ireland to Occitan, Newcastle to Barnsley. I'll be looking at how our 6,000 plus languages and myriad accents are threatened with extinction as the global village becomes a reality.